My name is Mark. This is Zen Talk, and we're going to talk about what Zen is really about. All right, so this may be a rather long video. You may want to pause right here and get some water or some snacks or whatever it is that you're doing, or come back to this video later when you have some time. So what this video is going to do is we're going to discuss exactly what is Zen, what is the point of Zen, and where is it going. So the short answer to what is Zen is that Zen is a methodology where you observe your suffering in your mind that is caught between the immortal soul and the decay of the phenomena, which is the five skandhas, and it's also known as the manifold material existence. So here I have a simple diagram over here that's right above my head. So we'll say that this is the undying, unborn, eternal soul here, which Zen would call your true self. You have your mind, which right here, it's Sita, and it's sort of caught in phenomena right here. And phenomena is everything that is not your soul and that could not say not you. So, your body is phenomena. Everything around you is phenomena. Basically, whatever is born, whatever rises up and decays is phenomena, and that's from you. Rocks can be considered phenomena because they form together and collapse. Even stars would be phenomena because they coalesce to become a star, ignite, and then eventually burn out, and either they die away or blow up. So that is the phenomenal world. This is what's caught between the two, and this is what suffers. All right, so there is a longer answer as to what is Zen. And so before we could get into what the Zen methodology really is, because that's what Zen is. It is a methodology. It is a process. It's not a religion. It's not a culture. Japanese culture is not Zen, but Zen is a methodology that Japanese culture has used. So before we can get into the Zen methodology of what it is, we must first know what our mind, soul, and phenomena are. Knowing what these are from a Buddhist point of view is critical to understanding what the Zen methodology is and how we can use that methodology. Okay, this is like a science or anything else. If you want to use a tool, you first have to understand the tool and know how to use it. Okay, let's get into some definitions, because words have meaning, and without properly understanding the words, you will misunderstand what I'm talking about. So let's get to the word Zen. When somebody says Zen, we're not talking about Japan, we're not talking about Japanese culture, we're not talking about customs and forms. The word Zen is Japanese for the Chinese word Chan, or the longer version, Chana, that roughly translates as meditation or contemplation. Now, in a religious, spiritual context in ancient Chinese, who derived that word from Sanskrit term dhyana, and that roughly translates to see, to observe. And what are we looking at? We're looking at the soul and to discover the spiritual mysteries. So this is what, in a religious, spiritual context, meditation, contemplation, Chan, and Zen is about. This is not about just getting clarity of mind or blissing out. This is what it is about. All right, let's move on. Methodology, another important word. Okay, I'll go ahead and disappear myself here. The Zen methodology uses discourses to educate as to the nature of the soul, mind, and phenomena. uses Socratic interview, which is called Mondo, Dokusan, or Sanzen in Japanese, to help dissolve doubts and conquer fears, and insight meditation, known as zazen in Japanese or gnosis in Greek. So this is the methodology that Zen uses. It's, first of all, a lot of times they can, well, we'll go to a Dharma talk. Well, these are discourses to educate the listeners into the nature of what is your soul, what is your mind, and what is phenomena. Because if you don't understand these things, you're not going to get very far. You're going to get stuck. Then it uses the Socratic interview. This is the teacher asking the student a question, the student asking the teacher a question. It could also be koans. It could also be what we call turning moments, where it's sort of a sharp back and forth between student and teacher, trying to uncover what it is that's keeping them from enlightenment. And this is called Mondo, Dokusan, and Sanzen. Anybody that goes to a Zen center is going to know what these are, but maybe they don't understand what it's about. So, again, it's all to help dissolve doubts and conquer fears, because the doubts, the fears, is what often keeps somebody from achieving enlightenment. And yes, enlightenment is easy, but it's not the final position. It's not the end all. A lot of people who don't understand what enlightenment is, they push it up there to be something like, Superman powers. But then that's because they don't understand it. Enlightenment is actually the beginning, and you almost have to be enlightened to really get any further with the Zen and the Zen methodology. Okay, let's move on. This methodology is not original to China or Japan, for it has roots going all the way back to the Greek philosophies of Plotinus, refined by Socrates and Plato, and carried forward by many others. And I've talked about this before, that Buddhism is not a unique spiritual philosophy or metaphysics that was developed in Southern Asia. That is absolutely not true. A lot of Greek philosophies that are much older than Buddhism were actually brought into the region of South Asia, and where people like to say that's where Buddhism became or developed at. And you can actually, when you're reading the Buddhist canon, you can see a lot of Greek philosophy in it. So it is very well established that there was a lot of influence by the Greek philosophies, Plato, Socrates, Plotinus, and it was carried forward into the area by the sophists. Remember, royal families, rich merchants, they would travel with their entourage. That could be 300-400 people. And this included their children, their wives, extended family. Of course, the teachers, they would hire educated people to teach their children, and of course their own priest and their own, wise men, who were all trained and had knowledge of Greek philosophy. So, getting on with it here, this methodology can also be found in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, which people would call Christian mysticism. There's another variation of mystical Judaism and mystical Islam. These people know about these things, but it's not as popular or as cool as Zen is. So anyhow, all these methodologies are found in different religions, although they have different flavors and twists. In other words, they do different things. And I have said before, achieving Satori can be done in many different ways. So the methodology, nevertheless, is there. You could, even though it's differently stated differently, and it has different methods. The Sufi spin, and Christianity uses pain, and Judaism, I don't remember what they use, but it's all different. But nevertheless, the methodology is there. So insight meditation, called zazen in Japanese, is to achieve samadhi, which is another Japanese word. It's the same thing as gnosis, which is a Greek word that the Greeks talked about. And that being a slight hypnotic state of mind with the purpose to delve inward into one's own mind with the intent of seeking wisdom and spiritual knowledge. So, if you watch my video on meditation and zazen, you will know exactly what I'm talking about with the slight hypnotic state and how it was achieved by many different paths and religions and styles. All right, let's move on. So, mind. In Zen literature, there is talk of the mind, also known as the little self or the false self, sometimes called the deteriorating self, that is the source of all spiritual suffering a sentient being knows. Zen says that it is this suffering that is the cause of all ills in a person and at the world at large. There are two types of suffering: phenomenal suffering and spiritual suffering. Phenomenal suffering is like being cold, hungry, in pain due to an injury or illness. In short, any adverse sensation that one's five senses, the five skandhas, can know, is known as phenomenal suffering. Spiritual suffering, though, is something like more like being lonely, melancholic, despotic, and modern psychology would call this depression. So we'll go through that again. It's melancholic, despondent, and you could basically come up with a whole list of what I would say would be mental suffering. It's not caused by its suffering, but it's not caused by an external factor. All right. So this is in general what we are talking about mind, and the mind is what suffers. All right, so let's talk about the source of the spiritual suffering. Often the two types of suffering go hand in hand. Where there is one, the other is bound to show up sooner or later. And you will see this if one is suffering physically, being too cold, too hot, too hungry. Oftentimes the other suffering will show up too. If you're hungry and nobody's feeding you, then you become lonely because you don't think anybody likes you. And vice versa, if you're despondent and melancholic, you may end up, being homeless or running away, and thus ending up into a physical condition. So the Zen methodology is used to understand the source of the spiritual suffering, and that is called enlightenment. This is a very easy thing to achieve, people. So I'll say it again, the Zen methodology is used to understand the source of the spiritual suffering, called enlightenment, that the mind, this false self that suffers, is caught between the eternal and undying soul and the impermanent and decaying phenomena. This is really, like I said, a lot of people they look at this word enlightenment and they think it's like, oh, this is like Superman powers, being Jesus, or some sort of really just fanciful type of way. And it's not at all. And enlightenment is not this far out Hollywood type of depiction that a lot of people paint in their minds. In fact, that becomes another point of suffering. And the enlightenment and the way people see it can create spiritual suffering. So when one understands the source of spiritual suffering, they understand why they suffer. That is enlightenment of mind. And they understand what the false self is and why it suffers, because it's caught. You're between this ever-decaying phenomena, your body, the world outside, everything, even your thoughts and opinions are decaying, and it's impermanent, and this undying eternal soul, which is there. You can't see it, you can't detect it, but it's there innately, and so you suffer. When one enlightens the cause of their suffering, then they know they have awakened, or it's called kensho in Japanese. And this is something where a lot of Zen centers refuse to even acknowledge the fact that one can become enlightened, that kensho happens, and it happens a lot. For me, this happened very quickly when I was starting my meditation. And I talked to the very nice gentleman that was considered the teacher at the Zen Center, and he listened to what I had to say, and he acknowledged what I had, but he said he refused to talk any more about it because he was fearful that it might cause mistakes and problems, which I would say for his concern at the time, that was very well. But he did later on in the years that I came to know him, said that often people would become enlightened within days or weeks of starting their meditation practice. And it was just a matter of working with that person. So Zen enlightenment is not the goal, nor the end. Rather, it's the beginning, and in many ways, a preliminary before one can commence the great path of the Buddha that he called Brahmayana, or translated as the path of the Absolute, which is an ontology of soul liberation based in wisdom. So you really have to know what exactly your spiritual suffering is and why it's there. And then once you see it, it's literally just like dissolving the chains and the bonds. And you see another one, bang, 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 bang. And eventually you become a free spirit. You're freeing your spirit. And when you free your spirit, it's called disembodiment in Buddhism, by the way. You'll read about it all in the sutras. So you become a disembodied free spirit, even though you have this body, this mortal body, but you know exactly what it is and the cause of suffering. And you're not yanked around by suffering. You're not yanked around by the pains, the chains that's caught, and you achieve the spiritual mysteries and gain wisdom. That's what's going on there. All right, let's talk about the soul. So the soul, which is often described as a lamp in religious writings, it shines spiritual light on phenomena, and that what knows this illuminate phenomena is mind. So it's like any light. It's the emitter. The flame emits the light. But the flame, you would not even know that the light existed unless it had something to reflect on. And it reflects on, the spiritual light reflects on phenomena, your body, everything that rises and falls. That which observes the phenomena, the rising, falling, the birth and the death, the creation and uncreation, is mind. And it's the mind that suffers because it sees all of this. It's like watching a tragic play. You suffer because the hero and the heroine is dying, and you don't want them to, and you're suffering. It's Romeo and Juliet. It's a poetic tragedy in works. So the soul is eternal. It is never born and never dying and always shining. This is not something that you can pull out of yourself like a rock or like an object. You can say, "Here's my soul." It doesn't do that. This is not something that you can point to and say, "Well, this is my soul. That is my soul." And we'll get into where the sutras talk about this. But nevertheless, you know it's there. You've always known it's there. It's innately part of you. And the reason that you know that you have a soul is because of your spiritual suffering. If you had no soul, which is eternal, you would never know of suffering, because phenomena would be all there is. It would just be whatever happens. You would have no knowledge of what things were before or what things were going to be. The true soul, the soul, your eternal, never born, never dying, this is your true and permanent self. It is permanent and unchanging. And in some ways, it's in Christian mysticism, they'll say the same thing. And I know that some people come from a Christian background, and they try to say that the soul looks just like you, or it's your body, or it's your human form, and that is not true. I mean, this phenomena is not the soul, and it cannot be the soul, and neither can your mind. Your mind cannot be the soul, but your soul is there nevertheless. Like I said, I have yet to meet a person who is not somehow innately knows of their soul. All right, so the great path, the way of the Mahayana, the greater vehicle, is to liberate the soul from suffering. This is what the Buddha taught with the teachings of Brahmayana. And the Zen methodology is the most expedient means to do such. And I'll really mean this. The Zen methodology is the most expedient means. Now, there are other methodologies. Tibetans have their own. Vajrayana is another very in-depth and intricate system, which I will not go into in these videos. I'll leave that for somebody else, but it does have a disembodiment practice. So, and getting to the Mahayana, there really is no such thing as a school of Mahayana or a Mahayana tradition. It's more of a classification. Nobody says, I am going to go practice Mahayana. That just doesn't ever happen. It's just you're trying to classify something. It's a classification. All right, so let's talk about phenomena. So phenomena essentially is everything that is not your soul. Termed as it's called anatta. The word atta here means soul, and an is an adjective which means not. So in Pali, and it's called anatman in Pali, and so it's anatta is Pali and natman is Sanskrit, and the an in both is an adjective saying not. So what is born, dies, rises and falls, and that grows and decays is phenomena. And when you say anatman or anatta, we're saying phenomena is not my soul. So not soul, not soul is phenomena. Your body is phenomena, though your mind is not. For it is like a glue, a chain, or a binding that is between phenomena and the soul. And only your mind can know suffering, where the soul or phenomena knows not of it. And this is very important here. Your soul cannot know suffering. Your soul can never suffer. And phenomena cannot suffer either. It cannot see itself. It does not. It's almost like an amnesic moment. It has no recollection of the past and no knowledge of the future. And so these cannot suffer. So the reason that you know you have a soul is because of suffering. Okay, so again, I know a lot of people will look at the words anatta or anatman and they say, oh, well, Buddhism says that means you don't have a soul, which is an incorrect, I would say it's not necessarily incorrect translation. I think it's just more or less an incorrect interpretation, and which is often a misunderstanding. All right, so anatta, the sutras use what's known as a via negativity or a via negative metaphysics, and which is basically saying my soul is not this, my soul is not that. And Buddha would say your soul is not the tree, your soul is not the rock, your soul is not the wind, your soul is not the barking of the dog. So it's the same thing as when early Westerners were talking about the ether, which is the space between things, even the space between atoms, or what radio waves will ride upon. They called it the ether, which they scientifically knew it was there, but they could not measure it, they could not hold it, they could not possibly even there was no way to see it. You cannot see the ether, you cannot measure it, you cannot, there was no device that said, oh, this measures the ether. But yet we know it's there because the radio waves move. So it's the same thing, which is in, you only can talk about the ether in science by talking about what it is not. The ether is not the metal, the ether is not the atoms, the ether is not, this is what not the ether is. So it's called a via negativity or via negativism way of discourse. And a lot of people don't understand this, and when they read the Nikayas where the anatta is talked about, and I'll go into another video that goes much deeper into anatta and how it is misunderstood because of the context. So when directly translating these words, it can easily be made to say not soul. So we'll move on here. Your body is phenomena, though your mind is not. I've already did this. All right, so let's talk about Brahmayama. Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, taught the path to the Absolute, which he termed Brahmayana. His philosophy is stated in the two documents that we know of, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. The sutras, which would be, the Nikayas, which is only 5 of those, are the sayings of the Buddha. So these are secondhand recordings from people who would listen or they remembered. And the suttas are commentaries on the sayings of the Buddha. And so there's tons more commentaries, and then there's commentaries on commentaries that are out there than there are of the sutras. Remember, there's only five books, 5 Nikayas, and they are secondhand accounts of what the Buddha said. So from these sources form the Buddhist canon. Now, other sects have gone off to make their own books and their own additions to what they call Buddhist canon, like the Tripitaka and the Abhidharma, which there's countless variations of those. But they are not necessarily considered Buddhist canon. And we also find that other schools like Rinzai and Soto and various Chan schools will have their own documents and takeoffs of these, of what they would call canon, which may be of very sectarian types of writings. So, Brahmayana, the path to the Absolute, is a liberation ontology based in wisdom. And by this we mean a methodology. It is a set of processes. In the process, so we are in the process of transformation. We ourselves liberate our own soul from the manifold existence suffering. The teachings of the Buddha are very powerful and true. For many that come and understand the nature of their suffering, thus achieving enlightenment, free their soul, becoming the Arhat, and help others free their soul too, becoming the Bodhisattva. And they would also be, the Arhat is also considered somebody, they call them to never return. But this is the path of Buddhahood. Now, the achieving enlightenment is actually probably, like I said, it's a preliminary. You have to achieve this before you can do the Arhat and then help others. So this can happen very early on for some people, and for other people because of doubts and fears and prior convictions, or just being stubborn in their beliefs of things that are illogical, they never achieve enlightenment, and they'll hopefully get it in the next lifetime. But for some, and for most people I've met, enlightenment is achieved, I would say, within 2 weeks to a month of meditation. The free your soul part, and they help others free their soul too, and that's a lifetime of work right there. That's not something that you just suddenly can start doing. This is your life work. And you would, even freeing their soul, you're always coming up with little tiny things, and you instantly see when you suffer and then release it. Suffering clings and you release it. And the helping others free their soul too, it's almost second nature, because if you have freed yourself from suffering and you see somebody suffering, you really just want to reach out to them and help them. It's just enough too powerful of a human nature to not want to help them. All right, so let's talk about confusion. There are those who will declare that there is no soul. They're the nihilist, and that there is only what your 5 senses know. Today, as in the days of Buddha, we know these people as the nihilist. For them, Buddhism is seen only as a set of moralistic codes and rules to be followed, so to make this phenomenal existence a utopia. These are spurious notions, false teachings, and are based on denial, mistrust, and suspicion of what the Buddha is actually teaching. And they have no understanding or experience with one's own suffering, the methodology of Zen, or even the desire to learn. The nihilists assume that they know all that there is needed to know, and they will look no further. Now, if there truly was no soul, as the nihilists claim, then Buddha's teachings would have directly said that. However, there was no such teaching or saying in the Buddha doctrine or its canonical writings. Finally, if there was no soul, then there would be nothing to liberate, thus no way out of suffering. Therefore, those who claim there was no soul deny the Buddhist teachings, and defeat the point of the Zen methodology. Such persons cannot said to be a disciple of Buddhism or a Zen practitioner. So I know this is an awful lot here. There's an immense amount of what I'm saying here. So let's just go back through this really carefully. Buddhism, that is seen only as a set of moralistic codes and rules to be followed, and obedience to the teacher or the sect or the school. This is known as secular Buddhism, and it becomes very political, in where they are bound and determined to make this phenomenal existence a utopia. In an irrational way, they are trying to liberate the Mahadhamma, or the five skandhas. They're trying to make this phenomenal existence, this rising and falling, this birth and death, eternal, which would be the utopia, forever lasting castle. And it is the most illogical and anti-Buddhist statement you will ever hear, or you will ever come across, when you see Buddhist, people who claim to be Buddhist, to declare that a set of moralistic codes and rules and doing what the sect tells them to do is going to make this phenomenal existence a utopia. You just scratch your head and wonder, how in the heck did that ever become Buddhism? It is completely backwards. So these are spurious notions, false teachings, and there's a lot of that out there, and a lot of it dresses up as Zen and Buddhist and wears robes and builds temples, and they're all based on denial. It's predetermined nihilism. People come to Buddhism already predetermined what they know. Mistrust and suspicion. These are people that have no understanding or experience with their own suffering or that of others. Sometimes they're solipsist, meaning that they think the world exists only for them and everything outside of themselves is an illusion. And they have no idea of what the Zen methodology is. They maybe only see it as culture, or as Japanesey, wearing robes and ringing bells. And even worse, they have no desire to learn. And as I said here, the nihilists assume they know it all, and they will look no further. They just won't. You can shove books at them. You can show them in black and white where everything they say, the Buddha counters it in the very books, and they will look at that and they will just say, nah, it doesn't mean that, because they won't look. Let's just move on from here, because when you're dealing with the nihilist, and especially those that have infested the Zen centers and your temples and claim to be Buddhist, and they will not look, they will not learn, they will not even want to know. It becomes extremely frustrating. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about skillful means and ways. So when you are dealing with the subtleties of the spirit, your one's very soul, you're always dealing with religion. So any metaphysics that deals with spirit, the soul, that's always going to be religion. When a methodology of soul liberation comes along, like Zen, which is an expedient methodology, it is often absorbed by the prevailing religions of the people, or their customs or their ways. Zen is a methodology, but Buddhism is a religious context to use it in. Zen by no means is the only soul liberating methodology, for there are many other methods that you can find in other religions, and also other metaphysics. It is just my view, that Zen is the most expedient. Yes, mistakes happen when people try to understand Zen. Some people see Zen as a cultural religion, a religion of a people and a land. Others see it as a meditation practice, but without any spiritual context or goal. So they meditate, they do zazen, but they don't have a spiritual goal. Some come to know an incomplete Zen methodology, which leaves them guessing at what the goal is. So sometimes people can get half the teachings, but they don't get the rest of them. So they're guessing and fumbling around, and they could be doing this for decades. So now that you know what Zen is and what the methodology is about, you can help those who are mistaken or holding an incomplete knowledge. You can refer them to this document or the video so that they can understand what Zen is really about and what's going on. Again, I know it's a lot here to take in, and I will be producing more documents and some written documents about this, and I'll be making a lot more videos going over this. So this is something that, in my opinion, understanding what Zen is and understanding what Buddhism is absolutely critical to your own spiritual progress and your own spiritual life, your development. I understand that there's a lot of what I call secular Zen, or people call it millennial Zen, which is, or social Zen, or socially aware Zen, or people even call it engaged Buddhism. I've heard that before. And this is all secular humanism. Basically says there's no God, there's no spirit, there's no soul, there's nothing to liberate because there's nowhere to go. And they point to phenomena as all there is. So they're trying to make that which is by its nature impermanent permanent. They're trying to make that which is in decay immortal. And if you want a definition of utter insanity, well, that is it. I hope you understand now what I'm getting at here, and I know you probably are, there's a lot of things I said that are confusing. I would definitely go back, watch the video again, watch some of my other videos, ask me a few questions if you want, and we can go through this further. And I have more videos on this topic that will be produced that will go into some very detailed levels of everything I'm talking about here. All right, so again, thank you very much. Please remember to like and subscribe. I really need your support. All right.